We're looking at the hiragana letters A to O in this video tutorial. What you have to do is, when you learn the stroke order of the hiragana, you've got to write it into your books using this system. In the first box, you trace over the grey tracing hiragana with a very nice dark colour for your first stroke. And there it is with A. I've put the first stroke in for you. Then you move to the second box and you're going to be putting that first stroke in again and the second stroke. And then in the third box, you'll be putting the first, the second, and the third stroke in. And then over here is where you put your mnemonic. Now you can use the one that I'm going to give you, or you can use your own. In fact, your own mnemonics are usually better than mnemonics that other people have told you. Now this column here, this gives you the hiragana. You can see that this hiragana is ever so slightly different to this one here. And the reason is this one over here is the printed font style, whereas what we're going to be learning in our workbooks is the handwritten style. And then in this column over here, you've got your romaji. Romaji, of course, means Roman letters. In other words, the letters we use. And if we have to represent the Japanese letters in English script, then we will use these letters. A, I, U, E, O. Notice that they're pronounced differently from English. It's not A, I, U, E, O. They're pronounced A, I, U, E, O. And the wonderful thing about hiragana is they never change their pronunciation. That is the only sound they make. Okay, let's have a look at the first one, the hiragana A, and check its stroke order. And I'm going to teach you a mnemonic to help you remember it. Okay, the first stroke goes across. The second stroke goes down. Notice when I'm going down, this is not a straight line. This is slightly curved. And we're going to think of those first two strokes as a sword. And it's going to be used by some crazy samurai fishermen who are out in their boat, and they're going to try and catch some fish by stabbing them with this sword. And they've done it so many times and so violently that they've actually, look, curved that sword blade there. So let's go one more time. Ichi, ni, your first two strokes, that's your sword. And finally underneath here, we've got the poor old fish. We're starting up with the tail. So we're going to go down, that's the fish's tail, around, that's the fish's nose, all the way round is our third stroke, and that is the other side of the fish's tail. Now that shape is more or less like that. And if we do it a little bit more crudely and we fill in the end, we can see very clearly there's the tail. We can pop in a little eye and you can see very clearly the fish there. Now this shape is ever so slightly different, but it's near enough to fish to remember it. And the mnemonic that we're going to use is ah! Or if you want to say it like a crazy samurai, ah! And then the rest of it goes, I caught a fish. Ah! I caught a fish. Let's look at the stroke order one more time. Ich, top of the sword. Ni, that's the bent sword. And the sun goes all the way around. There's the tail of the fish. There's the fish's nose. And that's the rest of the tail coming around like that. Hiragana A. And there's the mnemonic for you one more time. Ah! I caught a fish. Next we have hiragana I. That's what it looks like in printed form. And when we write it by hand, I'd like you to note the stroke order and put the first stroke in the first box and the second stroke in the second. Here's the stroke order. We go down like this on the left, and it's a slightly curvy line. Now this bottom bit is an optional tick off, because in the olden days, when you used to write with a bamboo brush, you actually used to drag your bamboo brush up like this, and then you'd come down and do the second half of the stroke. As you moved your bamboo brush from this point here to this point here, you'd lift it off the page slightly. And that would mean that here at its thickest point, it would slightly get thinner and thinner and thinner, and then this point here, it would basically disappear. And then the bamboo brush would be pushed down at this point, so it would be nice and thick, and down it would come nice and thick. Now what that meant was this middle period here more or less disappeared, and all that was left was this kick off here. Now when we do it by hand in a pencil, we tend to go down. We start this stroke in the middle, then we leave the rest of it blank, and then we start it again when we get to the top of this stroke here. So when we write it by hand, it looks like this. Down on the left, nice and curved, kick off, pretend we're drawing the rest of that stroke, start on the top of this right hand stroke, and down we come in. Again, it's slightly curvy. Now it's terribly important that you finish this second stroke at a level that's above the bottom of the first stroke. If you don't, you'll be writing a completely different hiragana. So this is I. Now I'm going to help you remember this by putting in the rest of that picture. It's not very clear, but I think it's near enough. Perhaps if I put some nice dangly earrings. Here they go. If I do that, you can see it looks a little bit like two ears. And I'm not trying to be too rude here, but someone I know with great big ears, you probably know him too, is Prince Charles. So we're going to borrow him for our mnemonic. And there we have Prince Charles' ears, and that sound I from ears. That's the sound that we're going to be using to memorize the hiragana I. Now we're going to move on to hiragana U, represented by the letter U in Romaji. This is what it looks like when it's printed. That's a printed font. And this is what it looks like when you write it by hand. Let's look at the stroke order and make sure that you put the first stroke in the first box and the first and second in the second box. We start with the top stroke first and we go across like that. That's our ichi. That's our number 1 stroke. And this one goes all the way around like that, and that's our number 2. Now the story that we're going to use this is rather a sad one. It's about an old lady. Now this is the old lady's back here, and I'll make that a little clearer by putting a foot there. It's a bent over back, and if she had her head it would be here, and then her arms would be like that. And then she's a very old lady, so she'd probably be holding a walking stick, particularly given that she's got that terrible bendy back, which she probably got from not having enough to eat during the war years. So there she is, bent over double, and she takes a walk every day from her house along the road to the little rice store that stood in Tokyo for years and years and years and years, and where she's always gone to collect her rice. But in the middle, between her and that rice store, is a brand new block of apartments that they're building here. It's not quite finished, so on top they've got cranes and things. They've also got a couple of workmen there, and they're busy throwing each other bricks like that. That bricks have to get from over here to over here, so they're throwing these bricks. They're throwing these bricks. Now this little old grandma happens to be walking by when one of these workmen throws one of the bricks way too energetically, and instead of ending up here, it goes all the way down like that and ends up hitting the old lady right there in the middle of her back. So there's the brick. It comes first. It comes flying down. There's the brick, and it lands just on her back, and she goes, "Ooh, me back!" And that's the hiragana ooh. Ooh for ooh, me back. And there's the mnemonic for us. It's ooh, me back. Notice that we write that O-O-H, but actually it's representing the hiragana ooh, because that's the sound that it makes. And when we write a Japanese ooh, even though it sounds like this, we use the romaji, or our letter U, to represent it. So don't get confused with that. Please don't write the hiragana ooh using O-O like that. It just won't work. Next we have hiragana e. That's represented with the English letter E. There it is in its printed form, and this is what it looks like when you write it by hand. Make sure that you write over these grey tracing letters, showing the correct stroke order. Okay, let's have a look at the stroke order. We have on top, first stroke ich. Then underneath we have what looks initially like it's going to end up being a Z. So it goes up and down, but instead of going across like a Z would, it suddenly changes into a 2. And there we have it. It looks a bit like a 2. Now the story for this is a little complicated, so you'll have to bear with me. We've got to go back to the time when there was a mix-up in the hospital. There were two ladies expecting little children, and one of them was a hiragana lady and the other was an alphabet lady. Only the people in the hospital, when the little babies were born, they managed to switch them. So little hiragana was accidentally given to the alphabet mother, whilst the alphabet child was given to the hiragana parents. Now, if this is all getting a little complicated, just bear with me. So this is the child, the hiragana child, the letter which was handed over to the alphabet mum and dad. Wow, they looked at him. They really couldn't figure out what on earth he was, and they didn't want to be horrible about it, so they did love it dearly, and they brought him up with great care and affection, and they sent him off to hiragana school. And until the point he went to school, he really didn't realise that he was different to any of the other alphabet letters. He thought that was the way everybody looked. Once he got to primary school, though, he found things were a little different. All the other letters, they circled around him and they pointed to him and they teased him. They said, "Oh my God, what are you? Are you a Z? No. Are you a 2? No. Well, we don't know what you are, but whatever you are, you've got an extra stroke on top." Now, all of that story is just to help us remember that this is the hiragana for extra stroke. So when we draw this hiragana, we draw the extra stroke on top, that's ichi. Then we draw the Z, that's ni. But we know he didn't really look even like a Z. He looked like a cross between a Z and a 2. So we finish off with a 2. Now I'll finish off the story. It's not a very sad story, actually. It's got a happy ending. Because little hiragana after suffering dreadful taunts about being not quite a Z and not quite a 2 and having an extra stroke on top, he heard the story of a little alphabet boy who'd been sent off to hiragana school and who was being teased in just the same way. And after a little bit of digging, they discovered the switch in the hospital, and the hiragana was returned to his rightful family, went off to hiragana school, where people thought he was a beautiful hiragana letter and they didn't tease him about having an extra stroke or not being a proper Z or not being a proper number 2. And of course the same thing happened with the alphabet letter. When he was returned to school, he fitted in and he wasn't teased, and the both of them lived happily ever after. One more time, let's have a look at the hiragana We have the extra stroke on top, we have the Z underneath, and we have what looks almost like the ending of a number 2. So we always start with the extra stroke, and here's the mnemonic. And there we have it. I've got an extra stroke. It's actually something to be proud about, isn't it? Finally, we have down here hiragana o. It's written using the English letter O. It's pronounced O. That's what it looks like when it's written in a printing font, and this is what it looks like when you write it by hand. Make sure that you put in each stroke in the correct order, building up from 1 to 3 in the way that I'm going to show you. Let's look at the stroke order. First of all, we're going to go across. Next, we're going to go down, but have a look at exactly where we start there. If we were to start in the middle of this hiragana, so roughly here, then that would be very similar to the hiragana a, but we're not going to draw that line in the middle of this hiragana. We're going to put it slightly off-center towards the left there, and we're going to go straight down. Unlike the hiragana a, which bends, we're actually going to go straight down. This is important so that we don't get it confused with the hiragana a. Then we're going to keep our pen on the paper. We're not going to lift it off. We're going to continue around. We're going to draw a beautiful oval shape like that. And then finally our third stroke comes down like this. Now this hiragana, we're going to use a story that relates to golf to help us remember it. So the first thing that we're going to draw is we're going to draw the flag which indicates where the hole is that we're aiming for with our golf ball. Let's just get rid of that stroke order for now. This part here is actually going to be the flag, and this here is the pole that goes down into the golf hole so that you can see where you're actually aiming for. So that's the pole. And that actually goes into a hole which you find on the golf green. Now it's the O sound from on that we're going to use to help us remember this hiragana. So this is all about a golf ball which is on the green. Now without taking our pens off, we're going to draw the green. There it is. I'm a little bit more accurate this time with following the line. So there's the golf green. That's the hole. That's the pole, which has got the flag on top. And here's the golf ball. Now the golf ball is coming flying in like this. So there's the trajectory of the golf ball. And this hiragana is actually allowed to have a little tick like that. And that actually shows that this golf ball, which was going right off the green, now suddenly swerves at the last minute and heads off down there for a hole-in-one. So it's a hole-in-one on the green. Let's check the mnemonic. And there we go. The golf ball is on the green, and it's that O sound that we want to remember. And that's A, I, U, E, O, done.